During the first week of my retirement, my son Brandon turned to me and stated, "We do not need another mouth to feed in this house." He then promptly found me a job as a cleaner. I smiled and agreed, a cold, sharp anger hiding behind a mask of weary resignation. But when I didn't show up for work, he realized something terrible. He had gravely underestimated me, and now his life would never be the same. Before we continue, please consider subscribing to the channel. I have wonderful news. Today was my last day at work. I am finally retired. The fork slipped from Brandon's hand, clattering against his plate. Sarah's eyes widened, her mouth forming a perfect circle of shock. I beamed at them both, anticipating congratulations, perhaps even a celebratory toast with the cheap Cabernet we kept for special occasions. Instead, a tense silence stretched across our small dining table, like an insurmountable chasm. Brandon recovered first, his face flushing crimson. "What? Dad, you can't just quit your job like that. Did you even think about what this means?" "Of course I did," I said, my smile beginning to waver. 40 years of service, son. I've earned this. I thought we could celebrate. Celebrate. Sarah's voice cut through the air, sharp as a finely honed blade. She set down her water glass with deliberate, theatrical force. "Brandon, your father thinks we're going to feed him for free." The sudden warmth in my chest, a residual joy from my final shift, began to freeze. This was not the homecoming I had imagined during my drive back to Oak City. I had pictured smiles, Brandon clapping me on the back, telling me how proud he was of his old man. Instead, my son's face contorted with an emotion I had never seen directed at me before, pure, undisguised annoyance. "Listen, Arthur." Brandon leaned forward, his authoritarian manager voice replacing any trace of filial affection. "I am not keeping an extra mouth to feed. You need a job tomorrow. I don't care if it's flipping burgers or stocking shelves, but you are not sitting around here living off my paycheck." Each word struck me like a physical blow. I stared at this man I had raised, whose university education I had funded, whose wedding I had helped pay for. The harsh overhead light cast deep shadows across his features, making him look like an utter stranger. Sarah nodded approvingly. "Arthur, you're 68, not 90. Plenty of people your age work. My neighbor's father bags groceries until he's 73. But I began." "You thought wrong," Brandon interrupted, cutting me off dismissively. "You think money grows on trees? Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain this house? To keep you fed and clothed? I work 50 hours a week at Sterling Manufacturing just to keep us afloat." The irony was not lost on me, though neither of them would ever understand it. Not yet. My untouched dinner grew cold as I absorbed their words. The meatloaf Sarah had prepared, usually my favorite, now looked unappetizing under the fluorescent light. Everything about the moment felt wrong, distorted, like viewing my life through a funhouse mirror. "You're right," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I should have discussed it with you first." Brandon's expression softened slightly, perhaps hearing the satisfying note of defeat in my tone. "Look, Dad, I'm not trying to be cruel, but reality is reality. We can't afford a freeloader. Dependent." The word buzzed in my head as I nodded, playing the role of the chastised father. "I will think about your words." "Good." Sarah gathered the plates with brisk, military efficiency. The sooner, the better. They disappeared into the living room, leaving me alone at the kitchen table. I could hear the television spring to life, their voices returning to normal conversational tones, as if nothing profound had just happened, as if they hadn't just shattered 40 years of dreams in 10 minutes. Slowly, I stood and began clearing the remaining dishes, my hands moving automatically while my mind processed the cruel transaction that had just occurred. They saw me as a burden. After everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, they viewed their own father as nothing more than an unwanted expense. I turned off the kitchen light and headed toward my small bedroom at the back of the house, leaving Brandon and Sarah to their evening entertainment. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, but tonight I needed to think and plan. I lay fully clothed on my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows from passing cars painted moving patterns. The house had settled into its evening quiet, but my mind churned with the dinner conversation. 40 years of faithful service, and this was my reward, being called a freeloader by my own son. The bedroom was small, furnished with just the basics. A single bed, one nightstand, and a dresser that had seen better decades. Family photos lined the dresser top. Brandon's graduation, his wedding, holidays where we all looked genuinely happy. Had that been an illusion? Voices drifted through the thin wall, separated my room from a master bedroom. At first, just murmurs, but gradually growing louder as Brandon and Sarah settled into their nightly routine. "I can't believe he just announced it like that," Brandon was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the drywall. I turned toward the wall, suddenly alert. They were talking about me. He thinks he can just sit at home on my dime. Brandon's voice rose, clearly not concerned about being overheard. 40 years of work. So what? That doesn't entitle him to retirement on my salary. Sarah's response came through muffled but distinct. What if he refuses to work? What if he just sits around watching television all day? Then we will take his pension and put him in a nursing home. Enough already. I'm tired of supporting dead weight. The words hit me like a splash of ice water. Nursing home. Dead weight. I gripped the bedsheet, my knuckles white in the dim light, filtering through the curtains. He's been mooching since Mom died, Sarah continued. Free meals, and now he doesn't even want to work. He's got nerves of steel. I closed my eyes, remembering the checks I had written. $23,000 for Brandon's university education, $8,000 for his wedding. They didn't even mention that they were living in the house I owned, the house where I'd chosen to take a modest back room. The old man doesn't realize how expensive everything is now, Brandon said, his tone utterly condescending. Utilities, groceries, insurance. He thinks it's still 1995. Maybe we should give him a deadline, Sarah suggested. 1 week to find work or he's out. Perfect. And if he complains, we will remind him that beggars can't be choosers. Their laughter drifted through the wall, casual and horrifyingly cruel. I lay there, absorbing every word, every dismissive chuckle, every casual reference to my uselessness. These were the people I had sacrificed for, the family I had loved unconditionally. The house grew quiet again as they prepared for sleep. I remained motionless, processing this new, grim reality. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenient expense. A nursing home. The phrase repeated in my mind like a funeral drumbeat. They'd already planned my exile, already decided my fate. Take my pension, the modest monthly check that represented 4 decades of labor, and warehouse me with other discarded parents. But as I lay there in the utter darkness, something else began to stir beneath the hurt and shock, a cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. They wanted to play games with their father's future. They wanted to treat Arthur Reynolds like some helpless old fool. Perhaps it was time they learned exactly who Arthur Reynolds really was. I thought about Victor Sterling. 25 years ago, when his small manufacturing company was just a startup dream in a garage, I had believed in his vision. I had provided $500,000 of investment capital, discreetly disguised as a loan to avoid complications later. We had shaken hands in that dusty garage, 2 men betting on the future. Sterling Manufacturing now employed 3,000 people across the entire Metro Central area. Brandon worked for a company his father had helped build, never knowing his paychecks were partially funded by the man he now called dead weight. All right, Brandon. This game can certainly be played by 2 sides. He saw weakness where there was only kindness, mistook generosity for desperation, assumed his father's modest lifestyle meant his father was powerless. Tomorrow, I would surprise them all by agreeing to work. Let them think they had won. Let them feel superior, while I positioned myself exactly where I needed to be. Sometimes the best revenge required patience, and I had spent 68 years learning how to wait for the right moment. Morning coffee was already brewing when I entered the kitchen. Brandon stood by the counter in his weekend clothes, while Sarah buttered toast at the table. Both looked up as I appeared, their expressions mixing curiosity with the residual hostility from last night's conversation. Brandon, I've been thinking about your words, I said, settling into my usual chair. You are right. The coffee mug froze halfway to Brandon's lips. Sarah's knife stopped mid-spread. They had clearly expected another argument, more pleading about my retirement dreams. Seriously? Brandon set down his mug with obvious suspicion. You're not going to fight us on this? What would be the point? I kept my voice steady, reasonable. A man my age should contribute to the household. I see that now. Sarah exchanged glances with her husband, probably wondering if this was some kind of trick. They had prepared for battle and found surrender instead. Brandon leaned against the counter, his manager persona fully emerging. Well, since you're being practical about this, I might have a solution. There's a janitor position open at my company, Sterling Manufacturing. I felt a small smile threaten the corners of my mouth and quickly suppressed it. That sounds perfect. I accept. Just like that. Sarah's voice carried notes of disbelief and smug satisfaction. You're willing to clean offices? Honest work is honest work. I replied, meeting her gaze directly. When would I start? Brandon's chest puffed slightly with newfound authority. Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp. You'd be ideal for the position. No complaints. Follows orders. Grateful for the opportunity. He paused, savoring his next words. The pay is minimum wage, of course, but beggars can't be choosers, right? There was again that phrase they'd laughed about through thin walls. I nodded seriously, as if accepting both the job and the insult with equal grace. I'll need to speak with my boss, Victor, about approving the hire, Brandon continued. But I'm sure he'll understand the family situation. Probably feels sorry for you, actually. Victor, my oldest friend, my business partner, the man whose garage I'd sat in 25 years ago, discussing dreams and investments. That's very kind of you to help arrange this, I said, letting just enough gratitude creep into my voice to make them feel truly magnanimous. Sarah reached across the table and patted my hand condescendingly. See? This wasn't so difficult. You just needed to face reality about your situation. My situation. If only she knew. I appreciate you both helping me understand, I said. It'll be good to have purpose again, to contribute something meaningful to the family income. Brandon nodded approvingly. Exactly the attitude we want to see. Maybe this will work out after all. He pulled out his phone, presumably to contact Victor Sterling about the janitor position. I watched him dial, imagining Victor's reaction when he received this particular request. I'll make the call this afternoon, Brandon said. Get everything set up for Monday. Perfect. I replied, already picturing my first day back at Sterling Manufacturing. It would indeed be a homecoming, just not the kind Brandon anticipated. The conversation moved on, but I barely listened. My mind was already planning Monday morning, calculating exactly how long it would take for the truth to emerge. Very soon, they'd learn that underestimating Arthur Reynolds was the costliest mistake they'd ever made. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. The week had passed in a blur of Brandon's smug preparations. He had proudly informed Victor about solving his father problem, purchased cleaning supplies for me, and outlined my duties with barely concealed satisfaction. I had played along perfectly, nodding appreciatively while internally counting down to this moment. At 7:30 a.m., I sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee and reading the morning paper. The cleaning supplies Brandon had bought remained untouched in their plastic bag by the door, a prop in the theater of his expectations. My phone remained silent until 8:15 a.m. Then it erupted. Dad, where are you? Brandon's voice crackled with fury and outright panic. My boss just tore me apart. Victor was waiting for the new janitor, and nobody showed up. Oh my, I said, affecting just the right tone of confused concern. What time was I supposed to be there? 8 a.m. We discussed this every day this week. How could you forget? I paused, letting his agitation build before responding with carefully measured bewilderment. I am so sorry, Brandon. Age, sometimes things just slip away from me. These old brains aren't what they used to be. This isn't about your brain. His voice rose another octave. I vouch for you. I told Victor you'd be reliable. That hiring family was a smart move. Now I look like an absolute fool. Perfect. I imagine Victor's confusion, probably wondering why Brandon was so invested in hiring an elderly janitor. My old friend was nothing if not polite, but he'd certainly noticed the irregularity. I feel terrible about this misunderstanding. I continued, maintaining my performance of elderly confusion. What did Mr. Sterling say? He asked why I was so personally involved in the hiring process. I had to explain you were my father living at home who needed the work. Brandon's voice carried the bitter taste of professional embarrassment. The whole conversation was humiliating. Interesting. Victor hadn't revealed our connection, maintaining his discretion, even when presented with this strange situation. He was probably trying to puzzle out why Arthur Reynolds' son was offering Arthur Reynolds a menial job at Arthur Reynolds' own company. Perhaps I could come in this afternoon, I suggested helpfully. Make up for lost time? No. Tomorrow you will be at work at 7:45 a.m. sharp. Or else. He trailed off, probably remembering he was speaking to the supposedly forgetful father. Just don't let this happen again, Dad. My reputation is on the line. Of course, son. I understand completely. After he hung up, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of deep satisfaction. Phase 1 had worked perfectly. Brandon was rattled, embarrassed before his boss, questioning his father's reliability. The careful authority he'd built around this arrangement was already cracking. With Brandon's angry phone calls still echoing in my mind, I moved to the small desk in my bedroom, where 2 manila folders waited. I had been preparing this particular surprise for 2 months, ever since the evening I discovered Sarah's secret. It had been a cold January afternoon when I'd noticed a Preston and Gates CPA's letterhead scattered across the kitchen counter. Sarah had been careless, leaving work documents beside her coffee cup while she answered a phone call. My trained eye, 40 years of reviewing financial statements, immediately caught the irregularities in the expense reports. Office supplies, $847.50. Equipment maintenance, $1,134. The numbers seemed inflated for a small accounting firm. Interesting, I'd murmured to myself that day, carefully photographing the documents with my phone, while Sarah chatted obliviously. Why does Sarah have work documents at home? And why do these numbers look so odd? That evening, I called my old acquaintance, Daniel Harrison, a forensic accountant who owed me several favors from our professional days. Daniel, could you check something for me at Preston and Gates? Completely confidential, of course. I'm curious about their actual office supply expenses over the past 6 months. 3 days later, Daniel had discreetly provided me with the real expense reports. The comparison was damning. Sarah had been systematically inflating costs and pocketing the difference. Office supplies that cost $347 became $847 on her reports, exactly $500 more. A $534 maintenance bill became $1,234. 8 months of careful theft, hidden behind falsified receipts and altered invoices. Now, sitting at my computer, I opened both folders side by side. The evidence was irrefutable. Sarah's falsified documents photographed from our kitchen table alongside the authentic records Daniel had obtained. The pattern was clear, systematic, and entirely criminal. My calculator showed approximately $18,000 diverted into her personal accounts, enough to fund her expensive taste for designer goods, but small enough to avoid immediate internal audits. I began typing the anonymous email. Dear Mr. Gates, I typed, addressing the firm's senior partner. I am writing to inform you of serious financial irregularities in your company's expense reporting. Your employee, Sarah Vance, has been systematically embezzling funds through falsified office supply and maintenance expenses. Please find attached documented evidence comparing reported expenses with actual vendor receipts. The pattern spans several months and represents substantial theft from your company. I recommend an immediate investigation and audit of all expense reports submitted by Mrs. Vance. I signed a concerned party. I attached the scanned evidence files, double-checked the anonymous email account, and hovered my finger over the send button. For a moment, I considered the total devastation this would cause. Sarah would likely be fired, possibly prosecuted. Brandon would face the stress of an unemployed wife under criminal investigation. Their financial stability would crumble entirely. Then I remembered their laughter through the thin walls, their casual planning of my exile to a nursing home, their complete dismissal of the man who had funded their entire comfortable existence. I clicked send. The email disappeared into cyberspace, carried with the destruction of Sarah's career and Brandon's peace of mind. Within hours, their world would begin unraveling from a direction they'd never anticipated. I closed the laptop and fed the physical documents into my small paper shredder. The evidence had served its purpose. Now it needed to disappear completely. The front door slammed at 6:43 p.m., followed by the sound of heels clicking rapidly across the hardwood floor. I looked up from my evening newspaper, feigning surprise at the urgency in Sarah's footsteps. She appeared in the living room doorway, her face blotchy with tears, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her blouse wrinkled, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "Sarah, what happened?" I set down the paper, rising halfway from my chair with practiced concern. "Why are you crying?" "I'm facing termination." The words tumbled out between gasping sobs. "Someone sent my boss some documents. Financial records. They think I've been stealing." "What terrible luck," I murmured, my voice carefully calibrated to convey shock and sympathy. "Who could have done such a thing?" She collapsed into the armchair across from me, her composure completely shattered. "I don't know. Someone anonymous sent detailed evidence to Mr. Gates this afternoon. Bank records, expense reports, everything laid out like some kind of forensic investigation." I settled back into my seat, maintaining my expression of bewildered concern, while internally cataloging every detail she revealed. Fascinating. Mr. Gates had moved quickly, confronting her within hours of receiving my email. "But surely this is some kind of misunderstanding," I said gently. "You're an honest person, Sarah." "That's just it." She leaned forward desperately. "The evidence is so detailed, so specific. Whoever did this has been watching me for months, documenting everything. It's like they knew exactly what they were looking for." "Indeed, they did. Have you told Brandon yet?" I asked, allowing appropriate worry to creep into my voice. Her face crumpled further. "No. How can I? He's already stressed about work, about the situation with you missing your first day." She looked up at me with pleading eyes. "Arthur, what am I going to do? If they fire me, if there are criminal charges, we'll lose everything." Now, I said soothingly, moving to pat her shoulder in a grandfatherly gesture. "We'll figure this out together. Family supports family, right?" The irony was thick enough to choke on. The woman who'd laughed about sending me to a nursing home was now seeking comfort from the very person she planned to abandon. "They've suspended me pending a full investigation," she continued, wiping her nose with a tissue. "Mr. Gates said the evidence was too compelling to ignore. They're bringing in external auditors, reviewing every transaction I've handled in the past year." The sound of Brandon's car pulling into the driveway cut through her despair. We both heard his footsteps on the front porch, his key turning in the lock. "Please," Sarah whispered urgently, "let me tell him myself. He's going to be devastated." I nodded sympathetically, settling back to enjoy the evening's final act as Brandon's voice called out from the entryway. "Sarah, Dad, I'm home." Brandon's heavy footsteps echoed to the hallway, each thud carrying the weight of his difficult day. When he appeared in the living room doorway, his tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled, his expression immediately shifted from tired annoyance to sharp alarm at the scene before him. "What did you do to her, old man?" He dropped his briefcase and rushed towards Sarah, who was still dabbing at her tear-streaked face. "I come home to find my wife crying, and you're sitting there like nothing happened." "Brandon, I didn't do anything," I began, maintaining my calm tone despite his accusatory glare. "Don't lie to me." His voice rose to a dangerous pitch. "First you embarrassed me at work by not showing up. Now you've upset Sarah somehow. What is wrong with you?" Sarah raised her hand weakly, trying to interrupt. "Chris, please. It's not your father." "Then what is it?" He whirled on her, his manager persona fully engaged, demanding answers with the same authority he probably used on his subordinates. Why are you crying? What happened? They want to fire me. The words burst from her lips like a dam breaking. Someone sent anonymous evidence to Mr. Gates, claiming I've been embezzling money. They've suspended me pending investigation. The color drained from Brandon's face, as if someone had pulled a plug. He stood frozen, processing this information while his carefully constructed world continued to crumble around him. Embezzling. He sank into the nearest chair, his earlier anger replaced by stunned disbelief. That's impossible. You're the most honest person I know. That's what I tried to tell them, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength from his support. But whoever sent this information knew exactly what to look for. They had copies of expense reports, bank records, everything perfectly documented. I watched Brandon's face cycle through emotions, confusion, denial, and a growing panic as the implications hit him. His father missing work, his wife facing criminal charges. Everything was spinning beyond his control. This can't be happening, he muttered, running his hands through his hair. Not now. Not when everything else is falling apart. What do you mean, everything else? Sarah asked, momentarily distracted from her own crisis. Brandon looked up at me with undisguised resentment. My father here decided to play games yesterday. Didn't show up for work after I personally vouched for him with my boss. Made me look like a complete amateur. I explained that was just confusion about the time I started. No more excuses. Brandon shot to his feet, pointing an accusing finger at me. Tomorrow you are coming to work with me, and you are working without any tricks, without any senior moments, without any nonsense. I'm driving you there personally to make sure you show up, and let's have no tricks, because I know you. His voice cracked with desperation and fury. I've had it with both of you causing problems. My reputation, my marriage, my entire life is under attack, and I'm not letting it happen. Don't worry, son, I said quietly, meeting his blazing stare with surprising calm. Tomorrow, everything will be different. Something in my tone gave him pause. For just a moment, his aggressive posture wavered as he tried to interpret my words. It better be, he said finally, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Because if it's not, if you embarrass me one more time, I'm following through on every promise I made about nursing homes and taking your pension. Do you understand me? I nodded solemnly, hiding the small smile that threatened to emerge. Tomorrow would indeed be different, far more different than Brandon could possibly imagine. Morning came too soon for Brandon, but I had slept peacefully, knowing this would be the final act of my carefully orchestrated play. I dressed methodically in the work clothes he'd bought me, each piece a costume for the performance of a lifetime. Brandon was already in the kitchen when I appeared, gulping coffee with grim determination. His face bore the marks of a sleepless night. Ready? He asked curtly, not bothering with pleasantries. Ready, I replied, pulling on the jacket that completed my janitor's uniform. The drive to Sterling Manufacturing passed in tense silence for the first 10 minutes. Oak City's morning traffic gave Brandon something to focus his nervous energy on. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, counting down the minutes until everything changed. Let me make something crystal clear. Brandon finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. Today there will be no confusion about time, no mysterious illnesses, no convenient memory lapses. You will show up, you will work, and you will make me look competent in front of my boss. I had to convince him to give you another chance. I understand completely, I said, keeping my tone appropriately submissive. And let's have no tricks, because I know you, Brandon continued, warming to his theme. I know you probably think this is all some game, that you can manipulate situations to get your way. But those days are over. From now on, I'm in charge. Don't worry, son, I said, allowing just a hint of mysterious confidence to color my words. Today, everything will be different. He glanced at me sharply, perhaps catching something in my tone that didn't match his expectations. What's that supposed to mean? Just that I understand the situation better now. I replied carefully. Sometimes it takes time to see things clearly. The Sterling Manufacturing building came into view, a sleek, modern structure of glass and steel that represented 25 years of growth from Victor's garage-based startup. Brandon had driven past this building thousands of times, never knowing his father had helped make it possible. "There it is," Brandon said, his voice mixing pride with anxiety. 3,000 employees, a multi-million-dollar operation. This is where real men work. Dad, this is what success looks like. Indeed, it was. And today, Brandon would learn exactly how much success his family had really achieved. We pulled into the parking lot, Brandon choosing a spot near the main entrance. As he turned off the engine, I could see his hands trembling slightly. "Remember," he said, turning to face me with desperate intensity, "whatever happens in there, you follow my lead. I do the talking. You stay quiet, respectful, and grateful for the opportunity." "Of course," I agreed, suppressing the irony of receiving such instructions about entering my own company. Brandon climbed out of the car and waited for me to join him on the sidewalk. Together, we walked toward the glass doors that would open onto the final scene of our family drama. In less than 5 minutes, Brandon Vance would discover exactly who his father really was. The glass doors of Sterling Manufacturing opened with a soft whoosh, revealing the gleaming marble lobby I hadn't seen in months. Brandon strode ahead confidently, nodding to the security guard. "Stay close and keep quiet," Brandon muttered as we entered the main corridor. "I'll handle all the talking." The hallway bustled with morning activity. Brandon had acquired a mop and bucket from the supply closet, which he thrust into my hands with barely concealed satisfaction. "Here, make it look authentic when Victor sees you." I accepted the cleaning supplies without comment. Around us, the business of my company continued as usual. Reports being analyzed, decisions being made, profits being earned from investments I'd helped fund decades ago. "There he is," Brandon breathed, straightening his tie and adopting his most professional demeanor. Victor Sterling was walking toward us from the opposite end of the corridor, making his customary morning rounds. At 64, he carried himself with the confidence of a successful CEO. "Mr. Sterling," Brandon called out, his voice carrying just the right note of respectful enthusiasm. "Perfect timing, sir." Victor looked up, initially distracted, then focusing on Brandon with polite attention. His gaze moved briefly to me, a routine glance at the elderly janitor accompanying his employee. Then he stopped walking entirely. "Brandon," Victor said slowly, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "You brought him here?" "Yes, sir." Brandon's chest puffed with pride. "I solved our staffing problem and my family situation at the same time. Here is my father, the new janitor." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Victor's face transformed to a spectrum of emotions: recognition, disbelief, and finally a cold fury that made the temperature in the hallway seem to drop 10 degrees. "Brandon," Victor said, his voice deadly quiet, "do you have any idea what you have just done?" "Sir." Brandon's confidence began to waver as he registered Victor's expression. "You brought Arthur Reynolds, one of the largest shareholders in this company, into my building with a mop in his hands, and you are standing there proud of yourself." The color drained from Brandon's face so quickly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. "That's impossible," he whispered. 25 years ago, your father invested $500,000 in my startup," Victor continued, his voice rising. "Without him, there would be no Sterling Manufacturing. Without him, there would be no job for you to lose, which you just did. You are fired immediately." Victor's words cut through the corridor like a blade, causing nearby employees to stop and stare. "Clear out your office and leave the premises. Security will escort you out." Brandon stood frozen, his world collapsing around him. His briefcase slipped from his nerveless fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed to the suddenly silent hallway. Victor turned to me with genuine concern, the anger leaving his voice entirely. "Arthur, my friend, what on earth is going on here?" I set down the mop and straightened to my full height, dropping the submissive posture I'd maintained for so long. When I spoke, my voice carried the authority and intelligence I'd kept hidden for days. "Victor, I think we need to have a private conversation in your office." Victor's executive office had always been a sanctuary of success. Brandon followed us in like a sleepwalker, his face still ghostly pale from the corridor revelation. He slumped into a leather chair, uninvited, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Arthur, please sit," Victor said. "Can someone explain to me why my business partner was just introduced to me as a janitor by his own son?" I settled into the familiar seat, feeling the weight of deception finally lifting from my shoulders. "Victor, my family has been under the impression that I am financially dependent on them. They have been uncharitable in their assessment of my worth." "Uncharitable?" Victor's voice sharpened. "Brandon, your father owns 37% of this company. He's been quietly drawing dividends for decades. What exactly did you think he did for a living?" Brandon's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Factory work. Manual labor. I thought he was poor." "Poor?" Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your father could buy and sell most of Metro Central's business district. He chose to live modestly, chose to let you believe he was struggling, and apparently chose to let you treat him like a burden." "But why?" Brandon asked, looking directly at me for the first time since the corridor confrontation. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to see what kind of man you would become without the corrupting influence of money," I replied calmly. "I want to know if you would respect your father for who he was, not what he owned. The answer, unfortunately, is that you wouldn't." Victor leaned back in his executive chair. "Let me understand this correctly. You discovered your father had retired, and your response was to force him into menial labor." "We couldn't afford," Brandon began. "You couldn't afford?" Victor's voice rose. "Your father has been supporting you your entire adult life. University tuition, wedding expenses, house down payment, money that came from his share of this company's profits. And you repaid that generosity by threatening to put him in a nursing home." Brandon's face crumpled as the full magnitude of his mistakes became clear. "I didn't know. Nobody told me." "Nobody told you to be decent to your father either," I said quietly. "Nobody told you to treat the man who raised you with basic human respect. That should have come naturally." Victor stood up, moving to the window overlooking the city. "Arthur, what do you want me to do about this situation?" "Nothing that hasn't already been done," I replied. "Justice has been served. Brandon's employment here is terminated, as you've already announced. His wife faces criminal charges for embezzlement at Preston and Gates, though that is a separate matter entirely." Brandon's head snapped up. "You knew about Sarah?" "I know about everything, son. I always have." I stood as well, feeling taller than I had in years. "The question now is what you're going to do with this knowledge." The office fell silent. Brandon sat surrounded by the evidence of success he'd never recognized, finally understanding that his father wasn't the weak, dependent man he'd imagined. Victor walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Arthur, you're always welcome here. This is your company as much as mine." "Thank you, Victor. But I think it's time I actually retired properly this time, on my own terms." I looked at Brandon one final time. "Perhaps this experience will teach you something about respect, humility, and the difference between being poor and choosing to live simply." Brandon opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. There were no words that could undo what had been done. As we prepared to leave the office, Victor held the door open for me. "Justice has been restored," he said simply. The week of my retirement had ended exactly as it should have, with truth revealed, respect restored, and justice served. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. Thank you for watching.